They thought this was my public execution. At Grandma Beatrice's will reading, my cousin Zoe stood up, pointed straight at me, and said, "She doesn't deserve a single dollar." Around the table, heads nodded, smiles appeared. In their minds, the verdict was already delivered. That's when the estate lawyer, Mr. Sterling, calmly closed the folder, looked at Zoe, then my Uncle Gregory, and said 7 words that flipped the room upside down. Actually, she left everything to the one who helped her expose the thief. The air vanished from the room. Mr. Sterling opened a laptop, connected it to the main screen, and clicked a file labeled security footage. No one spoke, no one breathed, but to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand what happened over the last 3 years. While Zoe was busy posting designer cafes from Milan, and Uncle Gregory was pouring money into one failed startup after another, I was here, every weekend, for 36 straight months. Not chatting, not pretending working. Grandma Beatrice wasn't just my grandmother. She was a historian, a collector, a woman who understood that history, once damaged, can never be replaced. Her library wasn't just shelves and books. It was rare manuscripts and first editions worth over $1.2 million, and it was falling into chaos. So I stepped in. I became the archivist. White cotton gloves, hand-built digital records, every item logged with origin, condition, and value. I learned to spot the difference between a water stain and chemical damage. I knew which bindings were failing, which pages needed climate control, and which pieces were irreplaceable. To Zoe and Gregory, this room was just future cash. To me, it was history that needed protection, and they hated me for it. For a long time, I thought they resented me because they believed I was trying to earn favor. I was wrong. The truth was colder. My work was a mirror. Every book I preserved reminded them how rarely they visited. Every artifact I protected exposed their plans to sell everything fast. My silence made them feel exposed. My consistency made them feel small, and people like that can't tolerate reflection, so they didn't try to outwork me. They didn't try to help. They tried to erase me. That's why they framed me. Because destroying my name was easier than facing the truth. They wanted to turn the perfect archivist into a thief. If I was guilty, their greed would look justified. If I was a fraud, their neglect would be forgiven. So they built a lie, planted a fake ledger in my bag, staged a public execution all to soothe their fragile egos. Zoe's chest heaved with fake outrage. I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, precise clarity. 3 years cataloging history had taught me everything except the most important entry, my own family's decay. But Grandma Beatrice had seen it all. She had prepared a final record none of them expected. Panic is a disorder of the unprepared. I stood still, hands lightly on the mahogany table. Zoe's screaming became background noise or irrelevant data. I glanced at Mr. Sterling, his face unreadable, a perfect mask of neutrality. And then I saw it, a subtle nod. The signal, it was time. He didn't argue. He didn't try to quiet Zoe. He let her shriek about integrity and family values, while he calmly connected his laptop to the library's main display. The large screen flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow. Folders opened. One file stood out, the Sting he dubbed. The video played. Not grainy, not shaky high definition. Crystal clear, perfect audio. Time stomped 3 weeks ago, and there they were, Zoe and Uncle Gregory, huddled over my work bag, left unattended in the archives. Gregory glancing around, nervous, wiping sweat from his brow. Zoe stuffing something into the side pocket. It was a ledger, fake leather-bound, designed to look like a black market record. "Hurry up," Gregory hissed, his voice trembling. "If she comes back, the whole plan is ruined," Gregory whispered. "Relax," Zoe sneered, dripping with arrogance. "The little mouse is too busy dusting old maps. She won't notice a thing. Once the police find this, she'll be out on the street, and we can finally liquidate this dusty old collection. I already have a buyer lined up for the first editions." The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the hard drive. They laughed. Not nervously cruel, self-satisfied laughter. They zipped up my bag, high-fived, and walked out of the frame, convinced they had outsmarted everyone. Zoe stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Color drained from her face, leaving her makeup stark and garish. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back to the screen. Desperation clawed at her throat. "That's fake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "A deep fake. You doctored that footage." Grandma was senile. She couldn't even use a computer, let alone set up a camera system like this. "You manipulated her." I almost smiled. She still didn't get it. She thought this was about technology. She didn't realize it was about character. She thought she was battling a tech-savvy grandmother. She was actually battling a woman who spent her life studying the past to protect the future. And history, as they say, isn't just written by the victors, it's recorded by them. Mr. Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He closed the laptop with a sharp snapper sound that cut through Zoe's hysteria like a guillotine. The echo bounced off the high ceilings, off shelves of leather-bound history surrounding us. Zoe flinched. Gregory froze, eyes darting to the door, calculating the distance to his car. "Let us put aside the video for a moment," Mr. Sterling said, voice steady, devoid of warmth. He opened a physical file on the table, crisp white paper against dark wood. "Let us discuss the inventory specifically. The first edition of The Great Gatsby and the 17th Century Celestial Atlas you removed 3 weeks ago. The items you sold to a private buyer in New York for $42,000. We didn't sell anything," Gregory blurted, sweat beading on his upper lip. We were securing assets. We were worried about theft." "Securing assets," Sterling repeated, tasting the words like spoiled milk. "Is that what you call a cash transaction in a hotel lobby with an unregistered buyer? Because according to the wire transfer records, the money didn't go into the estate trust. It went into a newly opened offshore account under the name Zochen Enterprises." Zoe's face contorted. "So what?" she snapped. "It's our inheritance anyway. We just took an advance. Grandma was hoarding all this wealth while I struggled to build my brand. It's not fair. Those books were worth a fortune, and she just let them gather dust." "Worth a fortune," Sterling said, and for the first time, a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. He glanced at me. A silent acknowledgement passed between us. He turned back to Zoe. "That is the fascinating part. Miss Chen, your grandmother wasn't senile. She was suspicious. She noticed gaps on the shelves months ago. She realized her legacy was being slowly cannibalized by her own kin." He pulled out a second document, an invoice from a printing company. "Beatrice didn't want to accuse you without proof," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. Everyone leaned in. 6 months ago," he continued, "she commissioned a specialist in London, a master of reproduction. She had high-quality facsimiles made for the 12 most valuable items in her collection. She placed the copies on the shelves and moved the originals to a climate-controlled vault in Zurich." The room went dead silent. Gregory's mouth fell open first. Color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. Zoe shook her head in slow, jerky denial. "No, that's impossible," she whispered. "The buyer verified them," Sterling said, his tone precise, surgical. "He wasn't a collector. He was a private investigator our firm hired. He wasn't checking the bindings for authenticity, he was checking to see if you were foolish enough to sell them. And they were." I looked at the empty shelves where the stolen books had been. Grandma Beatrice hadn't just protected her asset, she had weaponized them. Their greed became the instrument of their own destruction. They hadn't stolen a fortune, they had stolen paper and ink worth less than a few $100s. But in doing so, they had sold their souls, for a price that didn't exist. It wasn't just a trap, it was a masterclass in human nature. Beatrice knew they couldn't resist. She knew they wouldn't open the books. They only cared about the cover, and that shallowness had just cost them everything. The room didn't just feel quiet anymore. It felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened before a storm. Zoe had stopped screaming. She slumped against the bookshelf, staring at the floor, probably replaying every interaction with Grandma, trying to figure out when she had been out. Gregory looked like a man watching his own execution, but Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax. "Beatrice left this," he said, his voice softer now, without the sharp edge of the courtroom. "She asked me to read it only if the trap was sprung. She was very specific. If the books remain on the shelves, burn this letter. If they are gone, read it to the family." He broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper rang loud in the quiet room. He unfolded the letter, smoothing the crease with a reverence that made it clear he had loved her too. "My family," Sterling began, voice steady, hauntingly echoing Grandma's cadence. "If you are hearing this, it means you have failed. Given the choice between preserving our history and selling it for parts, you chose the sale. I write this with a broken heart, not a vengeful one. For the last year, I watched you see my library only as $signed. I watched you see Savannah only as an obstacle. I felt tears prick my eyes. She had seen everything. All those weekends when I thought she was napping, she had been observing the cruelty, the greed, the neglect. I did not set this trap to catch you," the letter continued. "I set it, hoping it would remain empty. I commissioned the facsimiles and left them in plain sight. Beatrice hadn't set a trap. She had said a final mercy. I wanted to give you one last chance, Sterling read, voice steady, to walk into this room, see something valuable, and choose to leave it be. I prayed every night that this letter would never be opened. I hoped my suspicions were only the paranoia of an old woman, but I am a historian. I deal in facts, not wishes. The fact is you looked at this family not as a legacy to protect, but as a carcass to feast upon. Zoe let out a small, choked sob. It wasn't an apology. It was the sound of a child realizing the parent she thought she had fooled had been watching all along. I cannot leave my life's work to vultures, Sterling continued, eyes locking on Gregory. I cannot entrust the past to people who have no concept of the future. The library, the estate, and the trust are not rewards for sharing DNA, they are tools for preservation. Therefore, if the books are gone, so is your inheritance. You have sold your birthright for $42,000. I hope it was worth it. Sterling paused and turned to me. To Savannah, my silent watchman, I am sorry I could not protect you from their nature, but I could protect you from their schemes. You never asked for anything, yet you gave me everything. You are the only one who understood that the true value of a book is not the price on the cover but the words inside. Do not let them make you feel guilty for their sins. You passed the test because you didn't know you were taking it. I leaned back against the oak table, the wood cool beneath my palms. It wasn't a victory lap, it was a tragedy. While Zoe and Gregory plotted, treating Grandma like a senile obstacle, she had agonized over this decision. She hadn't wanted to cut them off. She had given them a test of character, hoping against hope they would prove her wrong. The rope was given. They had tightened the noose with their own hands. The final piece clicked into place. Sterling cleared his throat. Now we must address the legal ramifications, he said, voice firm, official. The sale of the facsimiles is not a misunderstanding. It is a felony. Zoe looked up, mascara streaked down her cheeks. But they were fakes, she cried. We didn't steal anything valuable. Intent, Sterling said, leaning forward. The law cares about intent. You entered this house planning to steal property you believed to be worth over $40,000. You engaged in a transaction to sell that property. You accepted money for it. That is attempted grand larceny and fraud. The fact that the items were fake only means you defrauded the buyer as well as the estate. But the buyer was you, Gregory argued, panicked. You hired him. Entrapment applies to law enforcement. Mr. Chen, Sterling corrected, cool and precise. I am a private attorney executing the wishes of a private citizen, and the police officers waiting in the foyer are very interested in the wire fraud aspect of your little transaction, crossing state lines to sell stolen goods. That makes it federal. Zoe's composure shattered completely. She dropped to her knees, literally crawling toward me, grabbing the hem of my dress. Savannah, please, she whimpered. You can't let them arrest us. We're family. I'm your cousin. We grew up together. Tell him to stop. It was just a mistake. I looked down at her. This was the girl who had spent the last decade mocking my clothes, my work, my quiet life. The girl who had just tried to frame me for a crime I didn't commit, and now, stripped of filters, followers, and bravado, she was just a terrified child who had finally been told, no family. You didn't treat me like family, I said, voice trembling slightly, when you planted that ledger in my bag. You didn't treat me like family when you stood up in front of everyone and called me a thief. You were ready to send me to prison, Zoe. You were ready to ruin my entire life. Just for a few handbags. Uncle Gregory stepped forward, trying to intimidate with his size. But he looked deflated. Savannah, be reasonable, he said, voice trembling. Think about the scandal. Think about the family name. Your grandmother wouldn't want us in jail. My grandmother, I said, feeling a surge of strength I didn't know I had, left me a letter telling me not to let you guilt me. She knew exactly who you were. She gave you a choice, Gregory. You chose money. Now you have to pay the bill. The power in the room shifted completely. It wasn't with the loud, flashy influencers anymore. It was with the quiet girl who knew where the bodies were, buried or, in this case, where the books were shelved. Gregory's eyes darted from me to Mr. Sterling, his face a map of calculation and regret. He licked his lips, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Look, we can fix this, he stammered. Savannah, we're your family. Beatrice is gone. If you send us to prison, you'll be completely alone. We'll pay back the $42,000. Zoe has connections. I have prospects. Just tell Sterling to drop it. We'll sign whatever you want. Just don't let them arrest us. He was banking on the oldest weapon in the family arsenal, fear of isolation. He thought I craved connection, that I'd fold. I studied his face, the sweat, the trembling hands. Then I glanced at the empty leather chair by the fireplace. The leather was worn by decades of reading, thinking, planning. Beatrice hadn't left me alone. She had left me surrounded by the greatest minds in history. She had left me a purpose. In that empty chair, I saw the ghost of her strength. She hadn't hesitated because she knew protecting the future sometimes means amputating the past. Family isn't about blood, it's about shared values. They were parasites, feeding until nothing remained. Protecting the archive meant removing the threat permanently. I turned to Mr. Sterling. The air crackled with tension. Gregory held his breath. Zoe sobbed quietly. They were waiting for the quiet girl to fix everything. Proceed as instructed, I said. Cold, final, absolute. Sterling nodded once. Sharp and decisive. He pressed a button on his phone. The heavy oak doors swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a plainclothes detective. No introduction needed. Guilt was written across their faces. Gregory Chen, Zoe Chen, the detective said. Handcuffs ready. You are under arrest for fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The click of the handcuffs was deafening. Zoe screamed a raw animal sound of disbelief. Gregory slumped, defeated, letting them lead him away. They passed the shelves they had tried to rob, the history they tried to sell. I watched. I didn't look away. I watched until the heavy front door thudded shut, sealing the silence back into the house. Alone, now just me, Mr. Sterling, and 1,000 stories watching from the walls. But for the first time, the silence felt clean. 6 months have passed. I haven't just renovated a house. I've rebuilt a legacy. The bronze plaque outside now reads, The Beatrice and Savannah Archive. It's open to the public 3 days a week. Right now, I'm standing at the head of the long mahogany table, the same one where Mr. Sterling read the will, teaching a restoration workshop to 12 students who treat these books with the reverence they deserve. Zoe and Gregory, awaiting trial, blaming each other, cannibalizing their own relationship for a plea deal. I don't follow the news. I don't check social media. Their chaos is no longer my inheritance. People think revenge is destruction, burning down a house, salting the earth, standing atop ashes. But I've learned, destruction is easy. Construction is true revenge. Taking what they wanted to liquidate for quick cash and turning it into a fortress they can never touch. Turning $3.36 million into a foundation that will outlive us all. Every book I save is proof they were wrong. Every student I teach guarantees that their greedy, short-sighted worldview dies with them. Beatrice knew this. She left me the work, not just the reward. She knew the only way to defeat a parasite is to make the host so strong, so vibrant, so purposeful, that there is no room for infection. I walked to the empty leather chair by the fireplace. It isn't empty anymore. It's stacked with restored manuscripts, waiting to be catalogued. I run my hand along the leather. I don't need to speak to her to know she's here. She's in the quiet hum of the climate control system, in the sunlight hitting the spine of the Gatsby First Edition, safe behind UV-protected glass. She's in the peace finally settled over this house. I didn't just inherit a fortune, I inherited a duty, and looking around at the life I've built from the ashes of betrayal, I know I've finally balanced the ledger. If you believe integrity is the only legacy worth leaving, hit that like button, share this story, and tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable thing you've ever preserved?